Chullin Daf Kufyutes. We're in the middle of this amazing sugya of handles and protectors of food, how they combine with the fruit and with the meat to combine for a shear of a kibetza. You have a handle, you have a yad that's connected to meat. It combines to the shear of a kibetza. But what is the minimum shear of the food that we're discussing here? Can it be a tiny piece of barley? Does it have to be a larger piece of food? So we have a machlokes. Rav says that when it comes to handles, the minimum shear of the food is a kazayis, an olive. And when it comes to a shomer, the protector, the skin, the peel of a fruit, the skin on meat, then the minimum shear is a bean, a large bean, a pull. Rabbi Yochanan says no. When it comes to a handle, the minimum is less than a kazayis. It's a large bean, it's a pull. And when it comes to the protector of the food, then the food itself doesn't have to be as large as a bean, it could be even less than a bean. And then the Gemara goes on to ask a few questions from different brises. We have a brise that says that if you walk into a house, say for instance, you have a bone, this is the bone, with a piece of meat at the end. Let's take a more colorful one here. And you walk into the house, this is a bone of a person, a dead person. And all you put into the house, you stick into the house, is the bony part. So if the meat is a full kazayas, and all that goes into the house is the bone part, then the whole house becomes tameh. Oil. There's a tenth over the bone, and the bone is a conduit to tumah, because the tumah is in the meat, even though the meat is outside the house, the whole house becomes tameh because of yad. This is the handle of the meat. The question is, what happens in the machlokes is what happens if you have two pieces of meat, and each piece is a half a kazayas. Do they combine to make a full kazayas, and all that goes into the house are these two bones sticking up? So the Tanakhama says yes, they combine. Rav Yehuda Nekaisa ben Nekaisa says they do not combine. You can't combine two halves. So how does that fit in with the machlokes that we just said between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan? So there's two ways to look at it. Either Rav says I could be talking about over here a handle, that there's indeed meat on this side and this is the handle, and since I hold that you need a kazayas, and there's not a kazayas, it's two half a kazayas, I hold like your Yehuda ben Nekaisa, and therefore it's no good. Or he could say, we're not talking about that there's meat on this side. We're talking about that there's meat inside the bone marrow. Let's call this the bone marrow. And it's actually a protector. The bone protects the bone marrow inside. So we're talking about a shomer. When it comes to shomer, you need less than a kazayis. You need a poil, you need a bean. And I hold like the Manda Omer that says all you need is the Tanakhama that says two half a kazaysim of a shomer are mitzdarif, and everything is great. According to Rabbi Yochanan, we're talking about, Rabbi Yochanan says you need less than a kazayis. So if you need less than a kazayis, you need a poil. So we're talking about each one has a half a kazayis. That's enough. That's why the Tanakhama says two of these are mitzdarif and are mitam of the house. There's another brisa that says that if you have a thigh bone, and it's interesting, the Gemara is going to discuss this lashon. Why are we talking about a thigh bone? But if you have a thigh bone, and on the entire thigh bone, is machlokes how much meat you need in order for this piece of thigh bone to be metama, to cause tumah. Is it a kazayis or a poil, a bean? So again, if we're talking about, according to Rav, so we're talking about, is this bone a yad, is it a handle, and on top of the bone there's meat, and we go according to Rabbi Yehuda, and that's how we paskin, that you need a kazayis. Rabbi Yochanan says no, we're discussing a shomer. We're discussing that there's marrow inside the thigh bone. And as Rava points out, that's why we're talking about a thigh bone. There's so many other bones in an animal. Why are we discussing a koilis, a thigh bone? Because that has a lot of marrows. We're talking about a shomer. And therefore, you don't even need, once we're talking about a shomer, Rabbi Yochanan says you don't even need the size of a bean. This, that the other Manda Omer says, that Achirim say that you need the size of a bean, they didn't really mean a bean, they meant even less than a bean. Rav agrees that if we're talking about a creation, an entity, an individual piece, like we say halacha by an ant, one small ant, even though it's not a kazayis, you're over 5 times malchus. Why? Because it's its own entity. So if you have your own bean, if it's a full thing, then also the husk, the peel, the shomer could be mitzdaref to that fruit and create and become one combined for the shear. As we see in the brisa, it says the way, how do we know shomer? Because that's how you plant. That's how you seed your seeds, and you seed them with the husk on it, with the shomer. So you see, even individual ones, they have the shomer can combine for the shear of a kibetza. And one of the things that's brought down, a chita sayra and a dasha, a lentil, which is obviously less than a shear. A shomer on top of a shomer. Says the Gemara, it's not mitzdarif. You cannot combine one layer above another layer. So if you have, for instance, an onion that has many layers, the top layer is obviously not a shomer. The layer below that, the second layer, if it doesn't have any cracks in it and it's actually protecting the onion, so that can combine with the rest of the onion as a shomer. And the third layer, since it's white, it's already considered part of the onion. Food that you separate, and one half of the food has a half a shear, and the other half has the other half a shear, and they both have shomer. Are they mitzdarif? The Gemara is mesupik. The Brisa says the way, like we brought it down before, the way you seed a field is you take these zraim, and in order to get to the shear of a kibetza, you need obviously many seeds, because the seeds are much less than a kibetza. So l'chayr, it's a raya that you could take many seeds to combine to a shear. So if you have a half a shear, and each half a shear has a shomer on it, they can combine. Says Gemara, perhaps we're talking about the amazing story of Masechtas Tainas, where Shimon ben Shedach daven for wheat, and each wheat, Rashi brings over here, it's not really in the Gemara in Tainas, but he brings that the Gemara in Tainas says that they were, each wheat, each kernel was the size of 2 kidneys of a large ox. According to everybody, now we're talking about the hair on an animal. According to everybody, the hair on an animal is considered a shomer. There's a machlokes whether or not it's considered a handle. Why? Because in order for it to be a handle, you have to be able to pick it up, lift it up without it ripping off. And when you take the hide of an animal and you lift it up by one hair, the hide will rip off. Rish Lakish says, therefore, it's not considered a handle, but it is considered a shomer. What would be the difference between a shomer and a handle? They both accomplish the same thing. They both combine for the shear. The answer is a shomer has to be directly above the meat. And if it's not directly above what it's protecting, then it's not a protector. You can't have something, an umbrella protecting a person that's standing outside of the umbrella. You have to have the piece of hair directly above the piece of meat. Whereas a handle doesn't have to be directly above, it could be even to the side. So there's a kasha. It says that if you have a piece of skin and underneath you have a kazayis meat, and if somebody touched the hair on top, he becomes tamei. So you see that even one hair is mitama. So you have to say that it's talking about that the hairs puncture through the skin, and therefore it's a shomer, it's a protector of the meat. Because if it's above the skin, then the skin is a protector, and this is a shomer on top of a shomer, which we said is no good. Or we could say that we're talking about many hairs together, many strands, and it's a yad. Because when you have many, you could lift up the hide. And since you have many, even one of them, if you touch, it's mitama. Have a wonderful day.